Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today I want to talk about the supposed warning by the Department of Homeland Security to the American people that they need to prepare for a 6-month catastrophic power outage scenario. So let's get to it. Alright, so I've made a passing comment about this in a video before, but I wanted to expound on it a bit more because I believe that it's important that when you're reading information from alternative media, that you always go to the source to fact check that information and make sure that it's accurate. So there have been many posts on independent media, news sources, blogs, and just YouTubers who are talking about how the Department of Homeland Security supposedly had issued a warning to Americans to prepare for 6 months without power. Now, even though that isn't true, I'm going to argue in this video that you absolutely need to be prepared for a 6-month grid down scenario, but we'll leave that for later. Let's talk about this story in and of itself. So under US President George Bush, after the 9/11 attacks, there was an agency created called the National Infrastructure Advisory Council, and that was devised in order to advise the President of the United States of America on matters of security related to protecting all the areas of critical infrastructure, primarily the electrical grid or the energy sector. Now, before I continue, another reason why this is important is due to the current government shutdown. City Prepping made the point in a recent video that he did that the potential for one of these events to occur are more likely during a government shutdown, for the simple fact of the inability of government agencies to effectively respond to a disaster and, of course, to safeguard the country against the variety of threats which it faces. Now, this advisory council prepared a very comprehensive report for the Department of Homeland Security, which seeks to bring awareness to the potential threats to the U.S. power grid, as well as recommending different initiatives that might be employed to insulate the U.S. from one of these catastrophic long-term power outages. This is the report that many prominent YouTubers, bloggers, and independent media agencies are citing as the U.S. government, quote-unquote, warning the American people to prepare for 6 months, which is simply not true. The whole point of this document is to advise the federal government on ways that the public and private sector can come together to safeguard the U.S. against potential EMP attacks, solar flares, cybersecurity threats, things which would cause a catastrophic long-term grid down scenario. This wasn't some report which was put together by a bunch of retired military guys or a bunch of fringe elements within the government. This is a real deal, certified, very credible, highly influential, high-ranking people who put together this paper and interviewed people of the same ilk who are basically talking about a full-blown Mad Max SHTF scenario and how they're going to prepare for it. Now, nowhere in this document does it suggest or recommend or advise Americans in general, like the American population, that they themselves should be prepared for 6 months of a grid down scenario. Rather, it's saying that the government should be prepared for 6 months. Now, if the government actually came out and told the American people through its various mainstream media appendages that they need to be prepared for a 6-month power outage, that would either do one of two things. It would be an economic stimulus of proportions never before seen, or it would totally collapse the economy. It might lead to some short-term economic gains for many companies, but if everybody's taking their money out of the banks and purchasing commodities, eventually the prices of those commodities are going to skyrocket. And this is why perhaps they are not advising people to go to these extreme measures, because there may well be some unforeseen negative economic impacts. Asides the obvious short-term economic stimulus, it's very likely that the fractional reserve system as it is couldn't stomach the trillions in potential commodity purchases which would follow such an announcement. This, of course, may lead to a massive credit card debt bubble down the road, as everybody maxes out their credit cards to prepare for a long-term grid down situation. In addition, this could create some unforeseen panic in the markets, which might lead to massive sell-offs, and it might actually have negative economic consequences, is what I'm trying to say. So make no mistake, the American government has not advised the American people to prep for 6 months, and that's all the more reason why you should prep for 6 months for those of you with eyes to see and with ears to hear, because the simple fact that this report is largely being ignored by the current administration, who the funding for the National Infrastructure Advisory Council has pretty much dried up in the last couple of years. I think 2017 was its last official year of funding. I think this report was the final kick at the casket, if you will, for this agency, which may well be on its way out and is trying to remain relevant, but it's putting together this report, which is very well substantiated, it's very well referenced, very well researched, and everything they say in it makes a lot of sense. So in my personal opinion, even though people are false in saying that this is the government telling the American people to prep for 6 months, I think this is even more reason for you to prep for 6 months, because this is a very credible group of people who've put together this report, which is largely being ignored by the federal government. So if you hear people going around saying that the Department of Homeland Security has warned Americans that they need to prepare for 6 months, you can rest assured that they did not actually read the document from which that supposed claim was based on. Now that said, the current government shutdown, which is only exacerbating the existing everyday vulnerabilities to the U.S. power grids, only supports the argument for more preparedness measures for individual citizens. But one thing to note is that if there is a power outage which is going to be 6 months plus, you can probably bet that it's going to be much longer than that. So long as there's food aid and martial law being imposed, there will be some degree of order which is maintained. But as soon as that breaks down, and as soon as those soldiers and police officers start going AWOL to be with their families, instead of enforcing the excessive rule of law, which really at that point is going to be required to keep everything together. If you think that it's not going to be required to have martial law in an anarchic scenario where resources are very scarce, then you're living in fantasy land. Because the only way civilization bounces back from a scenario like that, a catastrophic long-term grid down power outage, is with a lot of help from the international community, which may not be able to help because we can presume that if things are happening here, they're going to be happening elsewhere also. But the only way that that's going to be fixed in 6 months is if there is martial law imposed on a massive scale and people's rights and freedoms are infringed. You can't have your cake and eat it too. If you want the grid to come back on, there needs to be excessive rule of law enforced. And I'm not saying I'm a proponent of this. I'm just trying to think of this realistically. I mean, how else are they going to repair all the transformers, keep the nuclear power plants operational, and bring back all the areas of critical infrastructure that need to be brought back online without guys with machine guns walking around? To think that that's just going to magically happen and people are going to get along when people don't have food to eat is pure fantasy. And of course that is going to lead to a lot of conflict between the LMOs, Last Man on Earth, the militia groups, and federal government agencies which are trying to impose this martial law. It's going to be complete bedlam and pandemonium, and I don't think that they're going to be able to uphold martial law long, not because they don't have the resources necessarily to do it, and not because I don't think police officers and military personnel couldn't be coaxed into doing that, and not because the American population as a whole is very, very compliant and willing to do whatever they're told. It's just that I don't think the logistics that are required for that to happen have been fully fleshed out enough. I mean, I'm sure they've wargamed some of this stuff, but the whole point of this committee putting forward this report is because the American government isn't prepared to deal with a situation like this and the civil unrest that would follow. Anyways, I hope this brief overview or synopsis of what this report is about has been helpful in shedding some light on what's actually going on. I hope that you would actually go and read the document if you want to be fully informed as to the thinking in the higher levels of the public and private sector with regards to this whole grid down stuff. Definitely go check it out. I'll post a link in the description. Thanks for watching. Please leave your comments below. Like the video if you found it useful. Canadian Prepper out. The best way to support this YouTube channel is to support yourself by gearing up through CanadianPreparedness.com or BugOutRoll.ca. Premium quality gear at the best possible price using the incredibly secure and easy to use Shopify platform. We offer free shipping to the United States for orders over $200 USD and free shipping to Canada over $75. So support the channel by supporting yourself.